Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we share powerful tales of transformation, resilience, and the power of human connection. Today's story takes us to the heart of a small town, where one man's fight for dignity sparks a movement that changes everything. Join us as we witness a powerful journey toward redemption, healing, and hope. James Carter rose early. As was his habit, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds of his small home on the edge of Cedar Grove. His joints creaked as he eased out of bed, a reminder of both his age and the decades he had devoted to his country. At 82 years old, James was a man of quiet dignity. His weathered hands told stories of battles fought, sacrifices made, and an unyielding resolve to survive. Today, however, he was simply a man looking forward to a peaceful breakfast. James adjusted his tie carefully in the mirror. His reflection revealed a face etched with lines of both joy and sorrow, his dark eyes still carrying the spark of the young man who had once worn a military uniform with pride. On this Sunday morning, he chose his favorite jacket adorned with medals, symbols of a life spent in service to ideals he believed would one day unite his nation. He placed his hat on his head, adjusted it just so, and stepped out the door. James usually went to Millie's Diner, a small establishment that had been a staple of his Sundays for years. But with it closed for renovations, he decided to try Maple Leaf Café, a place he'd heard about but had never visited. The cafe, located in the heart of Cedar Grove, was known for its home-style cooking and warm atmosphere. James looked forward to trying their famous scrambled eggs and house-roasted coffee. The walk to Maple Leaf Café was pleasant. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that comes with early mornings in small towns. James greeted the few passers-by with a polite nod or a soft good morning. Some returned the gesture warmly. Others seemed to look past him, their faces a reflection of the unspoken tensions that still lingered in Cedar Grove. James had grown accustomed to these small slights, though they still carried a sting. When he reached the cafe, its charming facade brought a smile to his face. The sign read, "Maple Leaf Cafe, everyone's welcome." He pushed the door open, and the soft chime of a bell announced his arrival. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon greeted him, a comforting contrast to the chill of the morning air. James scanned the room, noting the mix of patrons, families enjoying breakfast, couples deep in conversation, and a few solitary diners immersed in books or newspapers. A young waitress approached him, her name tag reading Lila. Her smile was genuine, and her warmth eased some of the nervous energy James hadn't realized he was carrying. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Would you like a table or a booth?" "A booth, please," James replied, his voice steady but kind. Lila led him to a cozy booth by the window. "This is a great spot," she said. "You can watch the town wake up while you enjoy your breakfast." James settled in, his posture as straight as it had been during his military days. The laminated menu was simple but inviting, boasting classics like pancakes, omelets, and the cafe's renowned scrambled eggs. Lila returned with a steaming cup of coffee, and James placed his order with a polite nod. "The scrambled eggs sound wonderful," he said, "and maybe a side of toast." As Lila walked away, James sipped his coffee, savoring the warmth and richness of the brew. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax, to simply be a man enjoying a quiet morning. But the peace was short-lived. The kitchen door swung open, and the owner of the cafe, Bob Henderson, emerged. Bob was a burly man in his late 40s, his bald head gleaming under the soft cafe lights. He scanned the room, nodding at familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries. But when his eyes landed on James, something shifted. The friendliness in his expression evaporated, replaced by a hard, unwelcoming stare. James felt the change immediately. It was a look he had seen many times before, a mix of fear, anger, and disdain. He straightened his shoulders, refusing to let the moment unsettle him. But the weight of Bob's gaze was heavy, a silent reminder of battles James thought he had left behind. Bob walked over, his steps deliberate and heavy. He stopped at James's booth, His face set in a frown. "We're full up today," he said, his tone sharp and devoid of the warmth he had shown the other patrons. "You'll have to leave." James blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He glanced around the cafe, noting the empty tables and the open seats at the counter. "It doesn't look full to me," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "I've already placed my order." Bob's jaw tightened. "I said we're full," he repeated. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." The words hung in the air, cutting through the gentle hum of conversation in the cafe. James felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but he steadied himself. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his military ID. "I've served this country for over 30 years," he said, his voice carrying both pride and sorrow. "I've earned the right to sit here and enjoy a meal." Bob's expression flickered shock, perhaps even shame, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "I don't care what you've done," he spat. "You're not welcome here." A hush fell over the cafe. Patrons who had been lost in their meals and conversations now watched the confrontation with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Some looked away, unwilling to meet James's eyes. Others stared openly, their expressions a mix of sympathy and unease. James rose slowly, his movements deliberate. His heart ached, not from the confrontation itself, but from the realization that after all these years, he was still fighting the same battle. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said quietly. "I just wanted breakfast." Before he could step away, the scraping of chairs echoed through the room. James turned to see a group of bikers rising from a corner booth, their presence imposing yet calm. At their head was a tall man with a graying beard and a steady gaze, Mike Peterson. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Mike asked, his voice calm but commanding. James looked at the bikers, their leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias. He saw something in their eyes, a shared understanding, a quiet strength. In that moment, he realized he wasn't alone. The tension in the room thickened, but a spark of hope ignited in James's chest. Whatever was about to happen, he knew it would be a moment he would never forget. As James Carter walked out of the Maple Leaf Cafe that fateful morning, he thought the confrontation with Bob Henderson might be the end of it. Yet, as the cafe door closed behind him, the group of bikers who had intervened trailed closely. Their leader, Mike Peterson, caught up with James just outside, his heavy boots crunching on the pavement. "Mr. Carter," Mike began, his voice gruff yet filled with respect. "We're not letting this slide. What happened in there? That's not just your fight, it's all of ours." James turned to face Mike and the bikers who had gathered behind him. Their leather jackets bore insignias of military service, brotherhood, and camaraderie. James studied their faces, weathered, resolute, and filled with a shared understanding of injustice. For the first time in a long while, James felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared hope for in years: solidarity. "Son, I appreciate what you did back there," James replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "But let's not make this worse. I've been through plenty of these battles in my life. Sometimes, you just walk away." Mike's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "With all due respect, sir, walking away isn't always the answer. Sometimes, standing your ground is the only way to make sure this doesn't happen to the next person." James sighed, torn between his deep-seated weariness and the undeniable truth in Mike's words. Before he could reply, Mike placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Let us handle this. Mr. Carter, we got your back." That night, Cedar Grove was eerily quiet. But by dawn, the silence gave way to a buzz of activity outside the Maple Leaf Cafe. When James stepped onto his front porch for his morning routine, he noticed an unusual sight down the street: a line of gleaming motorcycles parked in front of the cafe. Their owners stood like sentinels, arms crossed, forming a peaceful but immovable barrier at the cafe's entrance. Curiosity compelled James to walk closer. As he approached, he saw Mike in the center of the group, his arms folded, his expression a mix of calm determination and righteous anger. Around him were dozens of bikers, far more than had been in the cafe the day before. Word had clearly spread. "What's all this?" James asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Mike turned, his stern face softening when he saw James. "Morning, Mr. Carter. Just making our presence felt. We're not here to cause trouble, just to send a message." James looked at the group, their silent but powerful stance speaking louder than any words could. Behind the bikers, a growing crowd of onlookers gathered, their murmurs carrying a mix of curiosity and approval. Among them were neighbors James had known for years, some of whom approached to shake his hand, their support clear in their eyes. Before long, a police car pulled up, its siren cutting through the morning air. Officer Randall Thompson stepped out, his face a mask of professionalism as he approached the bikers. "What's going on here?" he asked, addressing Mike but casting a wary glance at the crowd. "Just a peaceful protest, officer," Mike replied, his voice even. "We're here to stand against discrimination." Randall's eyes flicked to James, recognition dawning. "Mr. Carter, were you involved in an incident here?" James nodded, his voice steady as he recounted the events of the previous day. He spoke with the quiet dignity of a man who had endured more than his share of prejudice, his words painting a clear picture of injustice. As he finished, a hush fell over the crowd. Randall turned back to Mike. "As long as this remains peaceful, you're within your rights," he said before stepping away to monitor the gathering. Inside the cafe, Bob Henderson watched the unfolding scene with mounting panic. The usually bustling Sunday morning crowd had thinned to a trickle, deterred by the presence of the bikers and the attention the protest was drawing. His business, once a cornerstone of Cedar Grove, was now at the center of an unwelcome spotlight. By mid-morning, news vans arrived, reporters eager to cover the story. James watched in awe as Mike stepped forward to speak on behalf of the group. "We're here to stand up for a man who gave 30 years of his life to serve this country," Mike told the cameras. "No one, no matter their race, background, or beliefs, should be treated as he was." The power of Mike's words resonated with the growing crowd. More residents began joining the protest, their presence a testament to the community's reckoning with its unspoken divisions. James saw familiar faces, neighbors who had once kept their distance, now standing alongside him in solidarity. Even Lila, the waitress from the cafe, joined, her apron replaced by a simple sign that read, "Equality Matters." The scene was overwhelming for James, who stood at the heart of it all, a reluctant symbol of change. As he watched, he felt the weight of decades of struggle begin to lift, replaced by a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. By the end of the day, the Maple Leaf Café was empty, its doors locked, and its windows dark. The protest had achieved what James never imagined possible. It forced the town to confront its prejudices and take a stand. For James, it was a reminder that even in the face of adversity, change was possible when people came together. As the crowd began to disperse, Mike approached James, his hand outstretched. "We're not done yet," he said, a determined glint in his eyes. "This isn't just about today. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did." James shook his hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, son, for everything." Mike smiled, a rare softness in his expression. "You've got a lot more people on your side than you think, Mr. Carter, and we're just getting started." For the first time in years, James allowed himself to believe that things might truly get better. The days that followed the protest felt like a blur for James Carter. Cedar Grove, once a town steeped in the quiet rhythms of daily life, was now on the edge of a cultural shift. The protest at the Maple Leaf Cafe had opened old wounds in the community, but it also sparked something unexpected, a conversation, a reckoning. And in its wake, James found himself caught in the middle of a transformation he hadn't quite anticipated. The following morning, as the sun rose over Cedar Grove, James found himself walking toward the cafe again. The heavy weight of the past few days hung around his shoulders, but there was a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, the streets of Cedar Grove felt different, alive with possibility. The small town that had long been divided by prejudice and old grudges was now being forced to confront the painful reality that had always lingered just beneath the surface. As James neared the Maple Leaf Cafe, He noticed a small crowd had gathered outside, whispering among themselves. It was an unusual sight for a Monday morning. But it wasn't the crowd itself that caught James' attention. It was the man standing in front of the cafe, holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Welcome everyone." James couldn't help but feel a twinge of hope. He recognized the man instantly, Liam Jacobs, the cafe's longtime regular, a man known for his opinions and his reluctance to get involved in anything that didn't directly affect him. But here he was, standing tall, making a statement with that sign. It was a small gesture, but it was something. It was a sign that the message of solidarity had gotten through to more people than James had thought possible. James stepped forward, nodding in approval. "Liam," he said, his voice warm despite the circumstances. "Good to see you here." Liam turned to face him, a hesitant smile forming on his lips. "Didn't think I'd see you again after yesterday," he said with a shrug. "But things need to change, don't they? I figured the least I could do is show my support." James felt a lump form in his throat. He had no idea how much that small show of support meant, especially coming from someone like Liam. It was the first tangible sign that Cedar Grove was starting to open its eyes. Inside the cafe, the scene was quieter than usual. The tables, once filled with the familiar hum of conversation and clinking silverware, were now empty, save for one. James walked in slowly, his eyes scanning the room. The old familiar scent of coffee and baked goods filled the air. But something had changed. There was a sense of something new in the atmosphere, a hope, a possibility. Behind the counter, Sarah, the young waitress, was wiping down the tables. She looked up when James entered, her expression a mixture of wariness and optimism. She walked over, her apron now adorned with a new pin that read, "Equality serves everyone." "Mr. Carter." Sarah greeted him, her voice soft but firm. "It's good to see you again. We're opening up today, under new management. I think you'll see some changes." James studied her for a moment before nodding. "I hope so. Sarah, it's time for change. For all of us." She smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "We're trying. I just didn't know what to do before. I didn't want to lose my job. But after everything that happened," she trailed off, looking at the floor, clearly struggling with the mixed emotions the past few days had brought. James placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did what you could, Sarah. It's not easy, but I think this town's ready to move forward." For a brief moment, James allowed himself to believe that things might be different, that Cedar Grove could become a place where everyone, no matter their background, could find a sense of belonging. By the time the cafe opened its doors again, the story of what had happened the week before had spread like wildfire. The media had picked up on the protest, and the town's refusal to sweep the incident under the rug had forced many to take a hard look at their own biases and actions. The Maple Leaf Cafe, once a symbol of small-town comfort, had become a microcosm of the greater fight for equality. Weeks passed, and the town continued to reckon with its history. Frank, the cafe owner, had disappeared for several days after the protest, and when he finally resurfaced, it was to make an apology that some saw as too little, too late. James had no interest in Frank's words anymore. What mattered now was what came next, not the apology, but the action, the change. One afternoon, as the cafe buzzed with activity, James sat down at a corner booth, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The new owners of the cafe, Mike and his group of veterans, had turned the place into a sanctuary. The atmosphere was welcoming and warm, a far cry from the hostile environment of the past. The walls, once bare, were now filled with photos and artwork that reflected the diverse tapestry of Cedar Grove, a tapestry James had longed to see for years. As James sipped his coffee, his thoughts drifted to the protest, to the bikers who had stood by him, to the community that had risen up in unexpected solidarity. He couldn't deny the profound impact those events had on him. It wasn't just about a single incident. It was about a shift in the heart of Cedar Grove. It was about redemption, and it was about transformation. Just then, Mike walked in, his tall frame casting a long shadow as he entered. He flashed James a knowing smile before sitting across from him. "How's it feel?" Mr. Carter? Mike asked, his voice quiet but sincere. It feels like things might be turning around. James replied, his voice filled with hope. Like the change we need is finally happening. Mike nodded, a look of quiet satisfaction crossing his face. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're on the right track. We got a lot of work to do, but at least now, we've started. As the day unfolded, James felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected allies who had stood by him and helped transform Cedar Grove. This was only the beginning, but for the first time in a long time, James Carter felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose, and a belief that, perhaps, redemption was possible, even in a town that had long been mired in division. With the cafe now a place of hope, healing, and understanding, James looked around at the community that had slowly begun to heal itself. The journey was far from over, but in that moment, it was enough to know that change had taken root. And for the first time in a long while, James knew that no matter the challenges ahead, he wouldn't face them alone. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of change and redemption. Stories like these remind us that no matter how small the action, standing up for what's right can create a ripple effect that impacts an entire community. We hope this story inspired you to be a catalyst for change. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories.